Hello and welcome to APAC Games Weekly episode 54. I am Connell Suter, and on APAC Games Weekly we take you through the biggest games headlines from the past week from across the APAC games industries. Today we're starting with a sad story. The Dragon Ball creator and Dragon Quest original artist Akira Toriyama has died at the age of 68. We'll talk a little bit about his influence on games and the legacy he's left behind. Following that story, we'll discuss Capcom increasing salaries in Japan and Nintendo winning its legal battle that we discussed last week. So, to begin, let's talk a little bit about the life and incredible work of Akira Toriyama. Akira Toriyama passed away on March 1st and is survived by his wife, son and daughter. Akira is best known as the original creator of Dragon Ball, one of the most prolific IPs to ever come from Japan, and certainly for my generation, one of the most important IPs to grow up with. This was back in 1984, not me growing up the creation of Dragon Ball, which of course has gone on to move from manga to anime to games and movies as well. After that, Akira went on to make a number of games and work on numerous series like Dragon Quest and the incredible Chrono Trigger. There's a widely reported thing being discussed today because it's very sweet that he actually hid a secret message at the end of Chrono Trigger for his kids that said, "Hey, Sasuke, Kika, Pop's working on games like this. Hey, are you guys watching? Isn't this great?" Which is just super sweet. His kids would have only been 4 and 7 years old at the time. Akira's work will of course be remembered for many, many years, but it is a huge loss to Japan, the games industry, and everyone he knew. Now, we'll talk about some of the less serious stories from this week. Capcom boosts starting salaries in Japan by over 25%. So we talked a few weeks ago about how Japan has managed to avoid pretty much all of the mass layoffs that Western games markets and companies have seen over the past year and even over the past couple of months. That trend seems to be continuing, with Capcom now increasing all starting salaries in Japan by over 25%. That means that from April 2025, new graduate hires will have salaries increased by around 500 USD, up from 235,000 yen to 300,000. Capcom made a statement on the move that reinforces that this is a strategic decision and an investment in what they call human capital to retain the incredible talent from the local market for the Japanese games industry. On top of this, there will also be a 5% increase for all their existing employees, which will take place from this fiscal year beginning in April. That's on top of the 30% salary increase that Capcom did for all Japanese employees in April 2022. All of this, just as a reminder, is kind of moved on by the Japanese government asking companies to increase wages for their employees a few years ago. I believe it was during the pandemic. And since then, many games companies in Japan have gone on to do that, including Nintendo, of course Capcom, and many more. It's a really impressive thing. It's very rare to see companies reacting so directly to something a government's saying, but also to go back to what the government said, it was in kind of no mixed words. They really were just saying you need to increase the salaries of your employees. So yeah, a great move, and let's hope that the rest of the world can do something a little similar eventually. Nintendo wins legal battle against piracy enabling emulator companies. So you'll probably remember from last week, as it was pretty big news, we discussed Nintendo suing the creators of the Yuzu emulator, which they claimed was enabling players to play games before release and generally avoid copyright restrictions. The company behind that was Tropic Haze, and they were pretty quick to move to final judgment, suggesting that they knew there wasn't really any hope of them winning the case. Nintendo, in the case, accused Tropic Haze of copyright infringement, circumvention of Nintendo Switch's protections, and selling those circumvented technologies as Yuzu, as well as additional charges relating to the software. Nintendo claimed that over 1 million people played the cracked version of Tears of the Kingdom that was playable through the Yuzu emulator. Yuzu responded and said that it doesn't offer pirated or leaked games itself, but it seems that Nintendo has targeted the company because the emulator is one of the few ways that does allow players to play those leaked games. In a statement published on Discord, Yuzu maker Bunai confirmed that anything related to Yuzu and a similar software I'll talk about a little later called Citra will come offline. He said, quote, "Piracy was never our intention, and we believe that piracy of video games and on video game consoles should end. Effective today, we will be pulling our code repositories offline, discontinuing our Patreon accounts and Discord servers, and soon shutting down our websites. We hope our actions will be a small step towards ending piracy for all creators' works." End quote. So as part of that, all their GitHubs, eventually their website, and already the Patreon pages that relate to Yuzu and Citra, which is a 3DS emulator made by the same people, will go offline. Overall, the case kind of couldn't have gone any better for Nintendo. It's incredibly open and shut. We're here a week later talking about the case essentially being over and the company capitulating to Nintendo's requests. But of course it does raise questions for the future about emulators, piracy, how that all works together. I don't know enough about Yuzu to say if it was being used predominantly for non-piracy reasons and a few people were pirating games or something, but of course it is pretty suspect that it even would allow access to these modern protected games. We're not talking about, we put in a thing to allow you to play ROMs and it just happens to work for Switch games. Clearly there was something in there that really was crossing a line that we felt, I guess, had already been crossed before, but this was really pushing it quite far down the line. So, obviously it's great for Nintendo. I'm sure that Yuzu users who were using it for non-piracy reasons will be disappointed, but there's plenty of emulators out there that hopefully can do the non-illegal things that Yuzu was doing. And that was it for APAC Games Weekly episode 54. Again, our thoughts are with the family and friends of Akira Toriyama. It's a huge loss to everyone who knew him, to the games industry, and to Japan. Sorry for the shorter episode this week. There wasn't as many big stories really from actually outside of Japan, as you could probably tell from the stories we covered, but I'm sure next week we will be back to the normal 10+ minute long episodes. I hope these stories have been interesting to you and that you do join us again next week for episode 55, same time, same place, YouTube and Spotify, 12 PM GMT. Until then, I hope you have a great week.